So far we have discussed the impact of change in price on quantity demanded of a certain product. Now we will discuss the impact of change in price of one product on quantity demand of another product, and the concept which is used to explain this phenomena is called cross elasticity of demand. And cross elasticity of demand is the responsiveness of quantity demand to a change in price of another product. And cross elasticity of demand is really important topic for every businessman to know, so that they can take decision accordingly. It is denoted as XED, or it is also denoted as CED. So both terms are used for cross elasticity of demand, and it is calculated as percentage change in quantity demand of product A divided by percentage change in price of product B. So product A and B are interconnected products, and they are related products, and the impact of change in price of one product affects the demand for another. And product A as well as B can be substitutes or complements. Substitutes and complements. And cross elasticity of demand is the basically concept which explains the difference between complements and substitutes, and it also explains the implication of each. So substitutes can be divided as alternative products, and for example the products we have these days, almost every product has its substitute. We can take example of air conditioner, car manufacturers, and electronic products producers like fans, and every product we have today has its substitute. And a very popular example which is generally quoted in most of the textbooks is the example of Coke and Pepsi. It's really popular example, and it's really easy to understand. So the change in price of Coke definitely affects the demand for Pepsi. For example, if there is fall in price of Coke, then what will happen to demand for Pepsi? Demand for Pepsi will fall. Why it will fall? Because when Coke is cheaper, and both products being similar to each other, consumer thinks that Coke is now relatively cheaper, and they will go for it, and they will demand less Pepsi. And Pepsi is relatively expensive, so people will demand less quantity of Pepsi. And the next very important information about substitutes is they have cross elasticity of demand which is always positive, and positive cross elasticity of demand means there will be positive relationship between change in price of one product and demand for another product. For example, if price of Coke falls, demand for Pepsi will fall. Price of Coke rises, demand for Pepsi will rise. So when two variables are moving in same direction, if one is falling and other is falling, one is increasing and other is also increasing, this phenomena is called direct relationship or positive relationship, and this positive relationship makes cross elasticity of demand positive for substitutes. Complements are jointly demanded goods like car and petrol. So fall in price of car will lead to increase in demand for petrol. Why demand for petrol will rise? It's definite. When car is cheaper, its price is falling, many people will buy cars, so demand for cars will rise, and consumers will have to purchase petrol as well. One important information about this is that cross elasticity of demand for complements is always negative. Like if price of car falls, demand for petrol will rise, and on the other hand, if price of car increases, demand for petrol will fall. When two variables move in opposite direction, one variable is falling and other variable is rising, we call this relationship as negative relationship or inverse relationship. So if price of car increases, demand for petrol will fall. Okay, another related information is what will happen to the market for Pepsi if there is change in price of Coke. If price of Coke falls, then demand for Pepsi will also fall. We can label quantity of Pepsi on X, price of Pepsi on Y, draw demand and supply curves for Pepsi. and initial equilibrium is at point E, where equilibrium price of Pepsi is P and quantity is Q. Now if there is fall in price of Coke, then demand for Pepsi will fall and demand for Pepsi curve will shift to the left, and the new demand curve for Pepsi will be D1. And this is basic principle: when there is fall in demand for a certain product, its demand curve shifts to the left, and new equilibrium will take place at E1, where price of Pepsi will fall to P1 and its quantity will fall to Q1. Okay, similarly, we can see the impact of change in price of car on market for petrol. Let's see, we have quantity of petrol on X and price of petrol on Y. This is quantity of petrol on X. Then price of petrol on Y. So this is demand for petrol and this is supply of petrol. Initial equilibrium is at point E. We can label initial equilibrium as E, where price of petrol is P and its quantity traded is Q. Now if there is fall in price of car, then people will purchase more cars and they will definitely demand more petrol, and demand for petrol will shift to the right to D1, and new equilibrium will take place at E1, where price of petrol will rise to P1 and its quantity traded will rise to Q1. So this is how the change in price of car will affect the demand for petrol. And another related information is that cross elasticity of demand for substitutes is always positive. However, it can be greater than +1, it can be less than +1, and it can be equal to +1, or it can be equal to 0. It can be equal to 0. Okay, what does these coefficients mean? Whenever there is cross elasticity of demand greater than 1, we call this situation as elastic demand. One really important information here is that the plus sign shows the positive relationship. Sign positive or negative sign basically shows the relationship. When demand is elastic, it means small change in price of one product will lead to greater change in quantity demand for another product. And in case of less than 1 cross elasticity of demand, it is inelastic demand. Large change in price of one product will lead to small change in quantity of another product. When it is equal to 1, it is called unit and shows equal proportionate change in quantity and price. And whenever it is equal to 0, then it means it is perfectly inelastic demand and products are totally irrelevant products. So change in price of one product will not affect the demand for another product. Cross elasticity of demand for complements is always negative, and negative is because of negative relationship between change in price of one product and demand for another. And however, it can be greater than 1, it can be less than 1, it can be equal to 1, or it can be equal to 0. Whenever cross elasticity of demand is greater than 1, it is called elastic demand. Again, keep in mind that negative sign shows the negative relationship between price of one product and demand for another product. So it is showing just the relationship. When it is greater than 1, it is elastic, means small change in price of one product will lead to greater change in quantity of another product. And when it is less than 1, it is inelastic demand. And inelastic demand means when there is large change in price of one product and small change in quantity of another product. It is unit when it is equal to 1, and it shows equal proportionate change in quantity and price of related products. When it is 0, it is perfectly inelastic, and perfectly inelastic means products are totally irrelevant. So change in price of one product will not affect the demand for another product. Okay. So these are really important information about substitutes and complements. And on the other hand, and another related information is, if there is fall in price of Coke, demand for Pepsi will fall, and it is really practical. This is the practical importance of cross elasticity of demand for businessmen. So they have to have knowledge of cross elasticity of demand to take relevant decisions appropriate decisions. In case of substitutes, if price of Coke is falling, then demand for Pepsi will fall. So it is really important for the Pepsi to keep in mind the demand, the price of Coke. If price of Coke is falling, the Pepsi seller must also decrease the price of Pepsi, otherwise its demand will fall and it may have to lose its loyal customers, and it may result in business losses. On the other hand, in case of complements, it is really important for the businessman to know about the trends and information of complementary products. And for example, if there is fall in price of cars, then petrol sellers must keep more stock of petrol to cater extra customers. Otherwise, they may have to lose their loyal customers. The last information about these concepts is calculation of cross elasticity of demand. Let's say if there is percentage change in price of B is 20% plus 20%, and percentage change in quantity of A is 40%, and it is again positive. So put the values in formula. 40% over 20% is equal to plus 2. Again, plus sign shows the positive relationship, and the value 2 is shows that it is greater than 1 or elastic demand. Percentage change in price of car minus 20%. Percentage change in price percentage change in demand for petrol is 40%. Now again we will put the values in formula. XED is equal to 40% over minus 20% is equal to minus 2. Minus sign shows the negative relationship, and it shows these are complements, and value greater than 1 shows that demand for these complements is elastic. So small change in price of one product will lead to greater change in quantity demand for another product. And this is really important topic, which is generally tested in MCQs, long questions, as well as data response questions.